Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's episode, I need to give you a quick heads up and a sincere apology. About 29 minutes into my conversation with Rob Tykal, the video cuts out, and as I found out the hard way, certain DSLR cameras, especially the older ones, literally stop recording at the 29-minute mark. I had no idea that was a thing, so lesson learned. The good news is the audio is intact, and the first half of this conversation with Rob is absolute gold. The bad news is you're not getting the full hour I thought I recorded. So I'm asking for your forgiveness on this one, and I'm making you a promise. Rob will definitely be back on the show so we can finish what we started. He's too good, and there's too much we didn't get to for this to be a one and done. Thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for giving me grace as I continue learning this podcasting craft. And now let's get into the part of the conversation we did capture. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Allied Advisors Podcast, the podcast for mid-market manufacturers looking to scale operation and improve that ever-important bottom line. Today, I am sitting down with someone who truly understands what operational leadership is all about, Mr. Rob Tykal. Rob has led major organizations at the highest level, president, COO, and VP of global operations across companies like Danaher, Superior Industries, General Motors, Daimler. What stands out about Rob isn't just his technical depth. Obviously, he has a ton of it. You'll see that when it comes to lean manufacturing, but also engineering and system safety. What really stands out is the way he leads with vision, values, and a genuine commitment to developing people. He's a builder of cultures, not just processes, and you'll see that in our conversation today. Outside of work, Rob's grounded in family, one wife, 3 daughters, 7 grandkids with an 8th one on the way, and 2 dogs. And he brings that same humility into his leadership philosophy. I'm excited to dig into his journey, the lessons he's learned driving transformation, and what great leadership really looks like all the ground. So Rob, again, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me today. Like we discussed in the pre-meeting, you've got such a depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge. It's really kind of hard to pick one topic. So, today I think we're going to focus more on supply chain because that seems to be the topic of the day for a lot of folks. But hope to have you back in maybe 6 months to a year to go into leadership and have a host of other things that we can discuss. But
I'd be honored and thank you very much for that intro. You're much too kind. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm happy to be here and look forward to contributing. Raising 3 daughters and a wife without any sons, you learn humility real quickly. So that's been part of my journey from day one.
Yeah, that's I have a daughter and a wife, so I get that.
With the grandchildren, I'm starting to even the score a little bit.
Right.
It's 4 boys and 3 girls. So at least I've got a couple of people to play golf with now.
There you go. At least you got a foursome built in.
Right.
All right, well, Rob, you mentioned that many manufacturers still rely on forecast-based systems instead of true consumption-based replenishment. From your experience, what's the first mindset or structural change a mid-market manufacturer needs to make to start moving towards a pull-based, flow-oriented material system? I think a lot of that, when we start talking about flow systems, and a lot of folks don't know what that is. It's like all they've ever dealt with is that forecast, right? If somebody's struggling with that traditional forecast model, what do you suggest? Where should they go?
It's funny you say that they don't even know what the pull system is because they use it in their personal lives every single day. And that's what I think, what's the first thing they need to do to change their mindset? It's to accept the fact that while some are better than others, all forecasts are wrong. At its best, a forecast is an educated guess. It's a prediction. It's what might happen in the future. 30 days from now, 60 days from now. Some companies forecast all the way out to 18 months. All right. If you want me to buy material and spend capital on what you think might happen a year and a half from now, that's insane thinking. And think of the way you run your household, right? If you bought your groceries on forecast instead of consumption, you'd be throwing away a lot of spoiled food and you wouldn't have what you need when you need it. I know growing up as a kid, my mother used to take a Sharpie. We had 4 boys and 4 kids, 3 boys and a daughter in my house growing up. I was the oldest child, and we went through milk like crazy because we loved our cereal in the morning. My mother took a Sharpie and put a line on the gallon of milk And whenever that milk got below that line, she knew the next time she was out to buy milk.
Yeah.
That's a replenishment based on consumption or usage as opposed to forecasting. Sure, you think she could calculate that we go through 2 or 3 gallons of milk a week? That's a good number on average, but it might not be good for next week or the week after. When my 2 brothers went to summer camp, and now there's only one guy chewing on the cereal every morning. So you got to be really careful when you go by forecast. I think it just makes a lot more sense. Why would you spend your own money, let alone investor money or shareholder money or corporate money, on capital that you might not use, when you can spend it knowing it's going to be consumed in a short time period based on your actual usage?
Yeah, especially when you use I know you use the home example, but when you have goods that expire, right? If you're buying things with an expiration date, it makes even less sense, right? Because you don't know whether your consumption is going to match that average over the course of time moving out into the future. So, and I see that all the time with companies that have long lead times, that forecast, and then they buy millions of dollars, and then product design changes, right?
Yep.
Customer preferences change, and they're stuck with a mountain of material that they can't do anything with.
The last company I worked for at Danaher, Cytiva, they're into biotechnology and bioprocessing.
Great example.
And we bought all kinds of chemicals and formulas to grow cells, right? We're trying to grow cell cultures and then feed those cells certain materials so that they produce certain kinds of proteins that are then used in the pharmaceutical world. But that stuff all has expiration date, right? And so if I fill my warehouse with a bunch of chemicals, just think of it as food for cells, right? And we made it in powder form or liquid form, Gatorade, powder Gatorade, liquid Gatorade. But that stuff goes bad after a year or two.
Yeah.
And if you're overbuying, now you got an E&O problem, excess and obsolete. You're throwing it away. If you're underbuying, I can't make critical products that somebody like a Pfizer or any of the big bio companies need. And then why are you affected by that?
And we talk about having that expiration of a year. How many times have you done a physical inventory at one of the companies you work for and found goods that have been there for multiple years? I mean,
it's funny you say that. It happens much less frequently at Danaher because we've gotten really, really good from a materials management system using lean methodologies and Kanban and other tool-based systems. But I can tell you exactly when we make a new acquisition and bring a company in, one of the first things we do is go through their inventory, and I'll see stuff that's 15 years old and had an expiration 13 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, you're right.
I mean, some of that stuff really sits out there, but just because they're not using the systems we're talking about, they're trying to use a forecast, and the forecast is always wrong, and then they wind up having to eat that inventory.
You know, there is a place for a forecast. I would say forecasts are useless, but necessary. Right. So somebody's watching this is going to say, what the heck does that mean? Understanding what a sales forecast is trying to tell you might cause you to rethink some of the parameters that you put into your usage determination. At the end of the day, there's a formula that I'm going to use to help procure my material. And it's based on what's my average daily usage of this material or SKU? What's the lead time from the time I place the order till the time it hits my dock? And then safety stock. And safety stock is a fudge factor I have to put in there in case the supplier misses his lead time, or perhaps I receive a shipment and find out half of it's defective and I can't use it. I don't want that shutting down my manufacturing operation. So we always put a safety factor in as well. Now, if you have a developed and established, mature set of suppliers, supply base, then the safety stock factor can be lower. But, if you're buying stuff from all over the world and you're relying on transport by sea, you better put some safety factors in there, given what's going on in the world today.
Yeah, we use a system, I learned it during my time at Bosch. It's called a reload-restock calculation. So it's replenishment time, lot size, withdrawal heat, and safety factors. And they break it down into, I think, 3 categories of safety, where it's supplier safety, right? You got a bad supplier. It's operational safety, which is,
Sometimes we mess things up.
Sometimes we mess things up too. And then I think the third one is
Probably forecast or demand.
correct.
If you sell a lot more than what your average daily usage was, you got to be able to.
That's the other one is the customer safety, like customer fluctuations. So yeah, that's exactly right. So they break it down into those three things. And here's what I tell people: the reason I say you should do that is, in the end, if I tell you get that inventory, how? How will you know what to cut, right? Why do you have the inventory you have? If I've done that calculation and I understand my replenishment time, my lot size, my withdrawal fee, my safety factors, when somebody comes to me and says, Justin, we need to tighten our belt, we got to cut inventories, we got to reduce our outlay capital, I can go to and say, okay,
Here's the risk you're taking.
here's the risk you take. If I cut safety, this is where you might get bid. I can speed up my replenishment time and ship this air freight, but there's a cost associated with that, right? There's no free lunches here. I can cut inventory, but just understand the impact that could have on the overall supply chain. So to your point, I think understanding that and being able to use that when you're modeling out those inventory levels that you're going to hold, it's got to be the first step if you're really trying to get a lean, thoughtful approach to your supply chain.
When you get good at this, if you've got all of your or the majority of your purchase spend on a replenishment system, Kanban, whatever you want to call it, there is no such thing now as lowering your inventory, because your inventory is always within the design level, which is an upper and lower limit that we can calculate based off that formula I mentioned earlier: average daily usage, lead time, safety stock, shipment quantity or per container. And then we just calculate how many Kanban signals do we need.
Right.
And obviously, when a shipment just comes in, we're going to be towards the max of our design level. As we deplete until we trigger that repurchase signal, then we're going to be lowering that inventory. But as soon as that replenishment comes in, before I run out, because I've got several other Kanbans, then I'm going to bump back up. It's going to look like a sawtooth over time, right? It should. And my design level is when I refer to design level, it's that average.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to think of it as a bandwidth, that's even more precise, because assuming nothing happens, nothing bad happens, the lower level in that sawtooth is going to be the lowest I'll ever achieve.
Yeah, and it's not as long as you've got that.
That's
calculated.
Right. And what should it be? If there's no issues, it should be the safety stock level.
We call those stability criteria, right? So you have a lower stability criteria. So as long as I'm above that, I'm good. And an upper stability. Unless I'm below that, I'm good. If I go beyond those limits, then we have a problem. We should react. We should have a standard reaction that we put in place.
That's right. And for our viewers and our listeners, I define that lower band and that upper band as the design level.
Yes.
And in my materials in the design level, there's no lowering inventory. There's no need to raise inventory. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. We manage that on a daily basis with the same types of tools we use in other manufacturing operations, lean tools. But we've given this one a specific name of IMAG, I-M-A-G. It stands for Inventory Management at Gemba. It's basically problem solving for management, or for materials management.
Right.
And one thing we do is we, once a week, we'll go out and we'll assess all the SKUs that we have in our raw material inventory. What are the top 20 that are over the design level? What are the top 20 that are below design level? And we'll figure out, and then I'll ask my material planning organization, how did it happen? Well, because if you're following the formula, it should never happen. It should never get above max. It should never go below min. And we'll find out there's reasons why that stuff happens, right? Engineering comes down for some prototypes they're building, and they take 50 parts off the floor. They don't tell anybody.
When the line goes down, and then the supply chain dumps out, so now I'm above my inventory targets because I'm not consuming at the rate I was planning.
But it shouldn't happen because it's consumption based. So even if the line goes down, because I'm not pulling raw material, I won't trigger that Kanban to reorder.
Yeah. So that's right.
That if I'm operating correctly, that shouldn't cause an inventory surplus.
You're exactly right. See there? That's why we got him on the show, folks. Yeah, that's exactly right. Hold on 1 second. I want to check on one thing. Make sure it's still good.
Yep.
Still good.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Justin, I find it somewhat interesting and maybe even a bit comical that in their daily lives, when people are buying things that they use, whether it's golf balls, something that's a consumable that you're going to run through and need to replenish. They're always doing it based on usage. But when they walk in the office, their brain shuts off and they start following some MRP system.
I think that's because of incentive structures, right? Because think about it. When does a planner get yelled at?
Well, that's a fair part. So it's not incentive. It's penalty avoidance.
Yeah, that's right. A planner only gets yelled at when they shut down the line.
That's right.
Rarely do they get yelled at. And I had an old guy I used to work with. He told me this one time, and it's always stuck with me. He goes, Justin, I'd rather get yelled at once a month for having too much inventory than every day for not having enough. And I'm like, well, I mean,
but
that's what
there's a mentality that it's an either or problem, and it's not. This is what we used to call the power of the and. You can't have both. You can have proper inventory levels and not run out. Low inventory levels and not run out.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And what it was a product of too was just poor management, for lack of a better word. Nobody looked at, there was no daily management routine that looked at his inventory like you're talking about and then tried to coach him on how to get it back to that right level and understand what the problems were. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about as well, and I see this all the time, and I'm sure you did too, or you do too in your consulting practice, but folks that have a year's worth of the wrong thing and they're constantly running out of the things that they need. And I think it goes back to your point about consumption-based inventory management. Why do you think it's more to it than that, or is it really just the strategy?
The simple answer is there's not more to it than that. It goes back to this forecast mentality. Mm-hmm. So if you talk to somebody on the commercial side of the business, on the sales side, when you mention the term forecast accuracy, they think dollars and cents. They say, okay, you asked me what my forecast was. I said I was going to sell $500,000 worth of product. I sold $490,000 worth of product. My forecast accuracy is excellent. If you're in the manufacturing or the production environment, that doesn't mean anything to you. Yeah. If you sold $490,000 of products A, B, and C, when your forecast was for D, E, and F, I've got all the wrong material in here if I bought based on the forecast. That's why buying an actual usage is the most important thing. If we could get commercial organizations to own up to forecast accuracy based on SKU level detail, now forecasts might become more important. But I would still argue they won't be any good. They won't be able to argue at a SKU level of detail. Think of something we all use. I'm sure that the major appliance companies can tell you approximately how many refrigerators are going to sell next month. Mm-hmm. Right? They've got history and loads of it to tell you, is it seasonal? But can they tell you exactly which model and which options? No. And that's what screws up the manufacturer big time. Because, I know I'm going to make 500 refrigerators on my line this month, but if you tell me if you think you can tell me the exact option content of each of those 500, you're crazy. Yeah. I know you're crazy.
Yeah. And it's funny, the forecast is always wrong, but you alluded to it earlier, but who always pays for it? It's the guys out there on that shop floor, right? I mean, the guys on the shop floor are where the buck stops. They're the ones that are all
planners getting beat up for the stock shortage. Yep. Finance is screaming at the ops leader because of the working capital issue. Poor inventory turns.
But it's always the doers that are the ones getting drowned in the gears, right? I think, too, one of the things that we should do a better job of as leaders is that root cause analysis, really understanding what the upstream processes and the effects that has on...
Well, what you're referring to, Justin, is the reason why it's so important for leaders, all the way to the top of the organization. Mm-hmm. Larry Culp, who's now the CEO of GE, was the CEO of Danaher when I was there. Right. He hired me. He participated in Kaizen nearly every single month and every year on the factory floor in blue jeans and T-shirt. Yeah. And every single year he held what he called the CEO Kaizen, where he went to one of Danaher's 250 manufacturing sites around the world and participated in a Kaizen the entire week. In some of the areas where the business, Danaher, needed the most attention. He understood it as well as anybody at any level in our organization. And that's what's required, is that leadership intelligence, because they know what questions to ask. When they walk through Gemba, They know what they see. They've learned to see the race in the system.
Yeah, and I think it's leadership's commitment to doing that. Like, it is not a common thing to see the executive team out on the shop floor digging into the details, right? I think for a lot of those folks, they kind of view that as, that's not my role. My role is to do something else, right? Not, I have people to do that. They need to do that. And it's not, to me, it's not that the executive is the one out there driving the projects and doing the project entries. No, of course. But the executive needs to understand where that waste is, to your point. They need to be able to see it. They need to be able to understand when it's resolved and when it's not resolved, how to ask questions to figure out the difference between the two.
Right.
And it's really rare to find an executive like yourself that really understands it and was willing to dig into that with the shop floor team. I mean, do you see something different? Or?
Absolutely not. I think depending on where you are in your lean journey, if you're a mature, well-seasoned company that's been doing lean for 10, 15, 20 years, let's take a Toyota, for example. Their people, their managers don't have to be on the floor as much, but they know what questions to ask. Right. And trust me, every high-level manager in Toyota is walking a factory floor at least once a week with an entourage of people, operations people, that he or she is asking questions of, and those are intelligent questions that let them know that they understand lean and what action needs to be taken as a result of it.
And it's funny, I had Winfred Rockenschneider on the podcast, and Mr. Rockenschneider, he's the global VP of logistics of supply chain for Bosch Powertrain Solutions. So big position, lots of people working under him, and he said the exact same thing that you're saying is you got to be on the shop floor. Leadership, him, has to be on the shop floor. They've got to be working through it with the people. They've got to be in the trenches and kind of be able to see it and help guide the folks through it. And it's just, it just always strikes me as the really successful executives, the ones that really get it and build things, they all come from that same position of, hey, we got to be out here in it with them.
Anybody who follows Larry Culp on LinkedIn will understand immediately what I'm talking about. Yep. Because every third post of his is a picture of him in one of GE's factories, right? Making jet propulsion systems. Yep. And he's digging through the details of, why is there that many parts there? Tell me how many we actually need. How do you know that's how many we need? What's our safety stock levels? And if you're not up to speed, he'll find out real quickly, and we'll get the training that's necessary for people.
Going back to the stock levels, and what do you suggest for, let's say there's somebody out there who's got a big promotion, right? And now they're the COO of this mid-market manufacturing firm, and maybe they don't have the lean experience that you got early on in your career. They've never seen what good looks like. What would you tell that person about, what should they do? What next steps should they take?
They can try to benchmark. Find companies that do it well, probably ones you don't compete with because they're not going to let you in, and find the right person to talk to get in and learn. There are a lot of consultants and advisors out there.
Right.
Some are very, very, very good. Some aren't worth a dime. Do some homework, do some reference checking, find a good one that you think you can trust, and spend some time with them. Ask them to come into your shop and go on a Gemba walk with them, and ask them. I'm not going to say a word while we walk through the shop for the next 45 minutes. I want you to stop and point out everything you see. Teach me to see like you see. What do you see, and why? What are the potential reasons for that? And then if they can do that, then maybe engage with that consultant or supplier to then help train and get you to that level. And not only can you see it, what do you do about it once you see it? Because the tools are important, but the tools aren't half as important as the mindset or the culture.
100%. I 100% agree.
That's why Toyota will let anybody who wants walk through their plants. Right. Because they tell you, you might be able to learn a tool, and the tools are important, but it's the culture that matters. Right. And that's the secret sauce.
Culture comes from the top. Culture comes from the top.
Absolutely.
And an organization culture is top-down driven. Yeah, 100%. I love that you said that. What are some, kind of looking at the flip side of that, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen young executives make when they're put in these roles?
Lack of humility, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
When somebody gets promoted, they feel like they have a responsibility to show that they deserve that promotion. Mm-hmm. I know every time I got promoted in my life, I was scared to death. and I'd go tell my wife, I can't believe they gave me that job. I can't do that job.
Right.
And she would just say, just ask a lot of questions, find people you can trust, and learn. It'll be fine.
Yes.
And she's absolutely right. And that's what the biggest mistake I would say is that lack of humility. Not being humble, but going out and trying to show everyone why you got the promotion and telling them what to do. You know, everyone's heard the cliche, our Lord gave you 2 ears and only 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you speak, and that's just great advice.
That's exactly right.
The other thing I see, and it's related to what we just talked about, is go out and get educated on this stuff. At the very least, make sure your team gets proper and good training. But you have to know it too. You can't delegate intelligence and leadership. That's going to have to come from you.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of goes to my next question. You've worked in a lot of really big companies, and you've worked in some smaller companies, right? I mean, you've kind of run the gamut in your
probably everything from $200 million in total annual revenue to over $10 billion.
Yeah, exactly. So, what do you see? What skills, right? What lessons did you learn at the bigger companies that also applied to the smaller companies, and maybe even vice versa, as it relates to materials? Because I think a lot of the times, a lot of my mid-market clients, you know, I start throwing out things that I learned during my time at Bosch, and you know, I can see the eyes glaze over because they're thinking to themselves, and I know it. We're not Bosch, Justin. I'm not an 80 billion euro a year company. That's not who we are. But
I see exactly what you're talking about. Exactly what you're talking about. And when I tell those people with a grin on my face, I say, Bosches wish they were you.
That's right.
Because you're smaller, more agile. I used to say, this used to be a cliche of mine, that any organization more than 500 people is a helpless bureaucracy. So the smaller, the better. I can wrap my arms around that. When I ran companies that had 250, 500, even 600, 700 employees, I could get to the point after a couple of years, I knew everybody by a first name basis. I could walk through Gemba and say, hey, Justin, how'd Sally do in her soccer game yesterday? How's Ian doing in T-ball?
Right.
And when you have that kind of relationship, it just makes everything run much better. So that's an advantage of a smaller company. There is an advantage of those big mega companies, and that's the influence and power they have over their supply chain. If we're going to talk specifically about materials, look at Toyota and the big Boeing here, right here in Charleston, South Carolina, or Volvo up in Ridgeland. You know what they get to do? They get to tell their suppliers, you will put a supplier facility within 5 miles of my plant, and that site will be dedicated to producing my parts, not my competitor's part. So they get to make those kind of demands because of their size and their spend profile. Right. But a small manufacturer has no chance. But inherently, the system we're talking about, a materials management system, is unrelated to the size of the company. Well, average daily usage, safety stock, lead times, those are all things you can calculate, you can determine and then build into your calculation. Now, is there a huge benefit to having your supplier across the street? Sure, lead time. The time I don't have to worry about transport times, right? So if they're making product and keeping some level of inventory, I can have lead times as low as 30 minutes. Where somebody like some of the smaller companies I ran, where we had a supplier that might be out in California and we're running up in Connecticut, I've got a plan in a lead time of 4 or 5 days. And that's if they have the material available. Right. If I place an order and then they have to buy their raw material, they have to manufacture, then they have to transport. I was looking at lead time sometimes at 30 to 45 days. Yeah. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is competitiveness. If that's okay from a relative competitive position to your competitors, then okay, you're all right. But the minute your competitor figures out how to do it in 20 days or 10 days, now you're at a competitive disadvantage and you're losing.
You know, so obviously if you're Volvo and we're spending millions for the supplier, you can dictate even location. But I even think on a smaller scale, what I saw in the automotive industry, because of the volumes that they purchased from the supplier, they were able to go to them and say, hey, something as simple as fill out this form telling me how you're going to send me my product, right? what box size are you going to use, what's the quantity, but we have packaging data sheets.
Yep.
And even in the mid-market, they're struggling to get that from their suppliers because they just don't have the buying power.
I would argue, not only do they not have the buying power, but before that, they don't even know what quantity they want in a package size. That requires some knowledge about the material flow through your factory, right? If I go to a supplier and say, all right, in your typical packaging, how many units are going to be per box? And they say 50, and I say, okay, when I only use 10 a week, I just know that I just bought 5 or 6 weeks worth of material per box.
Right.
And then if they say, well, there's a minimum order quantity of 10 boxes, guess what? You got a year's worth of inventory when it shows up at your door. Your working capital is going to hell. Your inventory turns is not competitive.